Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Coffee and Conversation right here on Yachting International Radio. My name is Ria. I am your host, and today I am joined by Manda Beaver. How are you, Manda?
Hey, Ria, I'm wonderful. Yeah, really good. How are you?
Good. Well, thank you for coming on board because the fact is you are a registered nurse.
I am. Yes, I'm a registered nurse, not currently in the battlefield, which was slightly breaking my heart. But my role these days, as many of you know, I have an adventure and extreme medical training company, and I also work for a couple of the for marine medical training, teaching the MCA, the medical care on board ships, etc. And also, work as a consultant for health and wellness in many of the lifestyle industries.
Well, one thing that I wanted, and a lot of people are questioning, firstly, the hygiene that surrounds this virus at the moment, the things that we really need to pay attention to, because I don't think we're all completely aware of the things that we may be at risk of coming into contact with, even if we are self-isolating. So for example, we go to the grocery store, we don't come within 10 feet of or 6 meters of anybody else. We still have the chance of coming in contact with the virus.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd just like to let everyone know I'm not an expert in this virus or a doctor. I've got a master's in international and public health, so which is probably 10 years old now, and health promotion. So they're two topics that are really close to my heart. However, I'm not, fully practicing in that field at the moment. So I'd just like to make that clear. So really, I'm just the same as you guys when it comes to this. However, I have been taking an interest in this because my job and my lifestyle requires an awful lot of travel, as do all my friends and family and loved ones. We had lots of guys and girls out there in the Caribbean racing when this all took off. Loads is still out there. My family's all over the world, and beautifully aging parents, and lots of new babies in our lives, and just so many people that we had to keep an eye on when we're such a global community. So that's sort of my background, and I guess I just wanted to learn the basics of it, because another thing that happens in these times is that we can get a bit exhausted by media, and we never really know what our sources are. So I'm really lucky that I am quite well connected to some world experts in global health, and I get to have conversations with them daily and find out what's happening on the front line. I'd get to talk to people working in emergency and who work with who, and other global entities in medicine, and insurance companies. I still do some consulting work with insurance as well. And so it's through the conversations and just choosing the basic, research from recommended places is sort of what I'm all about, because we can go off into all sorts of theories, and there's a lot of fake news out there. So today we'll just keep it sensible and real. And I just really like to remind you guys that when we're in social isolation, and self-isolation, we tend to start looking for media and looking for news, and we can start getting a bit addicted to it. And it can be a bit unhealthy if we're constantly reviewing it. So make sure you're coming from really good sources. Make sure you're looking, when we're in Spain. And so when it came out in Spain, it was heavily recommended that we just take news from the government and from the National Health Service. And I recommend that for each of you in your own countries. And also, I really like the work of WHO. I think they're, a global World Health Organization. You can't really go wrong there. So, that's the first thing to recommend. And then what I have experienced is, I think I was in around 2003 and 4 when I first started getting into emergency nursing and finished my graduate, my grad dip, and that's when SARS came out. So SARS is like a type of corona. It had a 60% mortality rate, so it was a lot stronger, but it was more lethal. So because it was so lethal, it didn't travel so fast. And working with SARS at the time was quite frightening. And then Then there was also the Middle Eastern one that came out, the Mars, I think. It was quite deadly as well. And it really hit the Middle East quite hard. That was about 10 years later. So I think it was been about 2012 or something like that. And now corona's like been around for years, and it often infects, especially kids, as a mild respiratory tract infection. But this is a different strain. And it's a lot more lethal than the flu. So, I guess the flu infects something like 0.1, 0.01, can't remember, of people, and the corona can infect from anywhere from 0.7, 0.5 or 0.7 to about 3.5% mortality. So, it's a big difference. And so in risky populations, so our elderly, the people that are immunocompromised, the people that are already in hospitals, their mortality is up to 10%. And then our healthcare workers, who we've all got, everyone's related to a healthcare worker. Everyone loves their healthcare workers. And right now, just a massive thanks to all those guys on the front line and supporting the families, supporting them, because they're really taking big risks to get out there, because their mortality rate goes up to 15%, even if they're young and fit, because they're less likely to be affected. So a lot of people, I'm conscious of touching my face, but a lot of people sort of talk about corona, and there are people that are a bit frustrated by the self-isolation and thinking that it's really annoying and, not sure what it's all about, and it's to flatten the curve. And there was a really good article that we'll actually put the link to, that many of you would have seen in Washington Post recently. It's like a digital animation with all these dots, and it shows the dots of getting infected and how quickly it spreads. Because there's a figure I read that every person that gets corona, keeping in mind that when you get it, you carry it for 3 to 5 days as being asymptomatic, without anyone even knowing you've got it. So, in that time, you could infect 2 to 4 people.
Well, isn't it actual fact, though, as well, that you could actually be a carrier of the coronavirus and never actually, have the full-blown disease yourself, but just be a carrier?
Oh, many people have mild symptoms, and especially people like us and, all the yachties out there, and people in the, high-end luxury travel lifestyle that are constantly jet lagged, constantly traveling, constantly in pressurized compartments. And, every time I wake up in a random hotel after a long-haul flight, which is often weekly, I've got a sore throat, and a dry cough. So we pass these things off all the time quite lightly and don't even think twice about it. How often do you feel like you've got a dry nose and a dry throat and a little bit of a cough? So then we've got the kids. So the kids and the adolescents, they don't really get it that much. There has been a couple of cases. We don't know, what the stories were with them, but they can be carriers. And so that's why the schools are closing down, because the kids often don't get any symptoms, or they just get really, really mild symptoms. But if they're exposed to it, they can transmit it, and quite rapidly, hence the schools closing down. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as far as, when you are doing your grocery shopping, or when you're going to the pharmacy, I mean, you have to be absolutely aware that even if you are like 6 meters, I think is the recommended space, away from other people, you're still not safe.
Yeah, and I think for us, because I'm sure a lot of the percentage of people that are listening to you are already young and healthy and slightly bulletproof, we have to take this seriously for everyone else. And while a lot of us are living transient lives and don't actually have regular contact with our grandparents, and our families, as we would have if we'd chosen a more traditional life, because many of us, are expats and living in islands, we have to think about the elderly and in the communities we're living and in these workplaces. And so, I'll talk about the transmission in these places in a sec, but the reason we have to be careful, and I read a really cool thing and was chatting to a doctor in Australia this morning, and they said that they're recommending that every time you go out, you only have 4 interactions a day. So that could be the bank person, the person at the supermarket, the partner you live with, and maybe one other, but they haven't enforced self-isolation there either. So we've got to think about our communities and how this works. Now, what we're doing is we're trying to, you've probably heard of like lessen or flatten the curve, and that's about limiting the transmission, because if we get spikes like this, our hospitals, and this is what I'm really passionate about, having been through SARS in the hospitals in ER, I went through mad cow's disease as, you know, working in the UK, swine flu when I was working in Western Australia and Tasmania. And yeah, you know, these diseases that really have a massive effect and really, you know, spike the people that are infected. And when that happens, all these people come into hospital and we've got to find them beds. So we're increasing the risk of the healthcare workers getting it, which is terrible because there's no cure or treatment for it yet. And we need those people on the front line, because we can't just train up a new set and send them in. You know, they're already a small population and so needed. And we don't have the beds. We don't have the ICU beds. And this is such the problem in every country. And when we don't have the beds and we don't have the respirators and we don't have the ventilators, then we have to go into what we call in adventure medicine, like and in the military, like a battlefield mentality, when it has to come down to survival of the fittest, you know, which we teach in remote medicine. Like, you know, you have to then choose who's going to get the treatment, who's got the best chance of living. And that's a horrible position for anyone to be in, especially doctors and nurses that are under pressure and working, you know, on the front line. No one should have to decide who lives and who dies. You know, and it causes a breakdown in the institution as well. I've been in that situation in SARS, and it was it's a horrible place because you're dealing with ethics, and do you save, you know, the child or the teenager or the man or the woman or the person with 3 kids or the old person? That, you know, it's just really tricky. So this is why we're trying to flatten the curve. We're trying to protect the hospitals, we're trying to protect the hospital beds, and we're trying to protect the immunocompromised. And so this is why, you know, every community has to be so prepared. And this is what's so important, I think, at the moment. And so what we have to think about is really taking this seriously and limiting it and thinking of ourselves, I think, as a potential carrier. So it's not about us, it's about everyone else that we come within that range of, you know. And if we're not being cautious, and, you know, we'll talk about the cautions in a moment. So, for example, you know, if you are carrying out work that's not extremely necessary, you know, and say, in an area, and then the whole area gets it. I mean, let's look at a boatyard or something. Like, let's imagine that one of the boatyards, there's, you know, people are still working, and then a carrier gets into the boatyard and infects the boatyard, and then the boatyard shuts down for months, and none of us can enter the boatyard to get ready pre-season, and then the bosses can't and owners can't use the boats, and the crew can't, you know, fix the boats and sail the boats, and the contractors can't work on the boats. It's going to have a massive effect on our community. And that's why we have to, you know, think about flattening the curve right now, because it could have detrimental effects on our own lives if that happens in our own back garden, right? Yeah. So if it's, you know, if you can't, so I like to think of myself in a weird way as a potential carrier. So I'm more actually worried about everyone else when I'm out and about, but I'm also very worried about what I could be bringing home and what I could be giving to other people. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. And actually, you know, it's a new way. I wasn't looking at it that way. I actually was just abiding by what I was told to do and not questioning anything. But I think those that are finding themselves a little bit angry that they're being put on lockdown and that sort of thing, I think the idea that if they do look at themselves as a carrier and act as if they are the carrier, that maybe that will give them, you know, a different outlook.
Yeah. And just remember, it could be your mum or your grandma or your auntie or your granddad or your grandfather, you know, or your father or your brother or your sister, or, you know, your owner. the person that pays your bills, the person that pays
Yeah.
your bills that pay the rent could be affected by you slipping up that one time, which is why I think I'm really promoting for my family and friends and community and clients that they practice self-isolation, even in countries that haven't enforced it at the moment, because every time you choose to stay home, you're reducing the risk of getting it and then for transmitting it. And so, if we take this really seriously globally, look at what's happened in China, and they've had extremely great effects. You look at the countries that have actually done this, and by, if we have to reduce our workplaces down to skeleton crew just for a small amount of time, like, say if we reduce, say a crew of 6 down to 2 just for a small amount of time, we're reducing the chances of getting it by like 66% or 60% or something. Someone told me the other day, when we were working, playing around with numbers like us science geeks do sometimes, and thinking, what do we do, and do people go home to their rights of abode or stay here? So it's a really interesting thing to think about that. And if we just do it for a short time, it means it could blow over, a lot quicker than if we all keep pushing the boundaries and taking longer to adopt those strategies. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, Amanda, for those people that are having to go out to work, for those people that are, for example, pharmacists, or as you said, they're working in a boatyard and they do have to go to work, what can they do when they get home to ensure that they're not bringing the virus into their locked down house?
Yeah. So, for me, it's actually like a normal day at work going out into the community because I'm a nurse. So, most of you, hopefully, that are working on boats have done medical training and know about personal protection. And it's something that we've really, when we talk about medicine as well, we talk about the Dr. ABC, that most of you should know what it means. D's for danger. And one of the biggest dangers that no one ever says in any of my courses, when I ask what D stands for, they say electricity and water, is body fluids, and just coming back to basic hygiene, I do recommend the mask, because the water droplets do carry, and putting on gloves. But also, once gloves are on, we need to be careful of what we touch and how. And we often like to keep our hands like this when we've got gloves on, because it's really easy to, I've been watching people. I find it quite fascinating. I've been at the emergency vet a lot for the last 24 hours, and there was a nurse there, and she kept, doing things and getting people's credit cards and putting it on the machine, and then pulling a mask out, with our hands, and then running through her hair and touching her face. And so we've got to be mindful that the gloves are on, and they're providing a bit of a sterile field. And then we also need to look at how we remove the gloves. So you want to remove the gloves like we do when we're wrapping up, a rag when we've been varnishing or something like that. And don't touch the outside of the gloves. There's a really good social media thing going around with the Spanish ambulance guy that talks about glove removal. There's some great stuff out there, and you can have a look. But it's really easy. You don't really need a lesson. Just practice at home, taking gloves off without touching the outside, wrapping them into a ball and throwing them in a container that maybe you have to keep in your car. Because I realised within a day I had this skanky little pile of gloves on the floor of the car, and then I was like, oh my God, now what am I going to do? So, had to, bring a plastic bag that in medicine we have a yellow bag, but bring in a plastic bag that you're thinking bio waste bag, and that's where you're putting the gloves. And we've got to make sure we don't touch anything that's touched anything else. So then, and it's quite interesting, like what we do with the mine. So when I first started applying this 2 days ago, when I had to go out and I went to the vet, which there were other people there, it's like, so I wear my gloves. I put my gloves on in the car, then I open the car door and go into the vet, do my stuff, use the FPOS machine, which I thought was a high risk area. Say other things, shopping trolleys, high risk area, petrol bowsers, high risk areas, anywhere where there's lots of hands. The FPOS machines I think are a big one. Then your credit card that's touching the FPOS machine could be another big one too, because then everyone's touching their cards. So then money and cash is a big one as well, like where lots of people are touching it. So being mindful of what you're touching. And then, what was tricking me was I was like, okay, so I get back to the car with my gloves on, open the car door. So I'm using in my mind outside the car door, gloves on, inside the car, gloves off in the bag, because unfortunately you can't just throw them on the ground and drive away. So you put them in your bag. And then I get out alcohol, so rubbing alcohol. Alcohol and chlorhexidine have been proven to be really good antibacterials at this time, because we know there's no, antibacterial soaps, wipey things out there anymore. So, they're two products that are really good. And I've got them in a little spray bottle that I keep in the car, and I give my hands a good spray and make sure, at the moment I've taken my rings off, I've taken my watch off, my bracelets off. I've also stopped doing my nails. As you probably all know, I've always got amazingly perfect nails. Not, but I have been making an effort lately. Fake nail in nursing, we're not allowed to have fake nails or shellac on the nails, because, as some of you might know, there's a tendency to not be as clean when you've got the shellac on, because you can't be cleaning under them all the time. So, we have to be really careful with our hygiene, and under the nails and watches. When I was a junior nurse and we started swabbing things, people with nail polish and people's watches were as gross as like toilet seats. They had so much contamination. So be mindful of that. And when you watch hand washing, YouTubes and things, you'll see really interesting information. So we get in the car and we start wiping our hands. I spray my hands before I then shut the car door. Then I shut the car door. And what I've been doing as well is putting my credit cards in a little plastic pocket that's in my back pocket, or putting the cards, every card I use, whether it's my NIE or my driving license, because we're getting lots of, showing a bit of ID at the moment too. Any card I get out with my gloves, I don't put back in my wallet. I put it in my pocket, and then I leave it there either until I get it out again with gloves or until I get home and disinfect it. Anyway, put my stuff on, then I shut the car door, then I'll also wipe down the handle where I shut the door, then I'll wipe the steering wheel, and then I'm good to go. Yeah. So, thinking about it, just imagine if you had dye on your fingers. This is how we learn about it in occupational health and safety when I did my certificates there. They put dye on your fingers, and if, everything you touch goes purple until you work out how, careful you have to be, and just be mindful of that, And I think that, and the mask, and obviously if you have to cough, they're saying to cough into your arm like this as well. But also, when we're hand washing, like something I find really interesting is we don't know how to hand wash. No one's taught that. And also for those mums, and in communal places, we've got to make it fun. So, many of you would have heard this before when I'm teaching medicine, but the top of the body is cleaner than the bottom of the body. We consider in medicine. So we start washing with really hot soapy water. So soapy water is clinically proven to be just as good as any antibacterial, and especially in the case of this virus, because soap has, as you all know, it's got an anti-lipidomal thing, so it breaks down fat. So, when you put your fairy liquid, your washing detergent in the pan that you've just cooked your oil in, it disappears. That's how soap works, right? So the virus actually has some fat in its membrane. It's got lipids in its membrane that make it kind of sticky. So the soap will break that down and help get it off. So really hot water as well is all we always use in medicine. Once again, being mindful of the taps. When I'm on planes and in public transport, I've always got tissues in my pocket or gloves. I've been doing this for years. I don't get sick when I travel, because this is how I fly on a plane. Sometimes I'll double glove actually to go to a bathroom on a plane, and for opening door handles and all those things. So when we start washing, we start at the top of the arms up here, and we wash our way all the way down and down to the wrist, all the way around the wrist, and then down the fingers, all the way down the fingers. So, we do one section at a time of each hand, washing under soapy water, and we're supposed to do it for 2, even 3 minutes, which in medicine we say is singing Happy Birthday, the song, twice. But, to make it more creative and for it to make more sense for your kids at home, you might have to find, you could sing, do the times table if they're young, or ABCs, or a fun motivational song that the whole family love. We've got to make these things fun, even for adults, it's our biggest problem. And remember that the whole culture of nursing and hospitals changed dramatically when Florence Nightingale, who gets teased a lot, people call goody two-shoes as Florence Nightingales, but what she brought to the world was hand washing. And as soon as she brought hand washing to the world, we minimised disease. And that's the difference we have living in the modern world. And as soon as I started getting anal with hand washing, not just in hospitals, but in travelling, in air, flying around the world and public transport and everything I do, the healthier I became. There is a direct link. So hand washing is really important, but we've got to remember not to then get OCD, because one of the biggest calls I'm getting at the moment are from people at home saying, when we're at home, how often do we keep washing our hands? And my answer, and we keep using the alcohol and all these products, and my answer is, when you get home, have one sink, that you wipe with alcohol and chlorhexidine, and you keep really, really clean. Most of us have got the luxury of a couple of sinks in our houses. When you come home, you go to that sink, you have that really good hand wash, and then you glove up and you wipe it all down with the alcohol and clean all the surfaces quite carefully, and then you should be good to go. And you just wash your hands before eating and after going to the toilet, and like you
The
would
normal stuff, I would imagine. Yeah.
You don't want to create a culture where we're getting obsessive compulsing at home, because you could get if you wash your hands too much, you could get dermatitis, and you don't want, especially kids and people with soft hands. We see a lot of stewardesses getting dermatitis, from washing their hands too much. So we've got to be careful there, not to go to OCD, if I'm allowed to use those words on public radio. Yeah.
Well, I mean, realistically, it's the person coming into the house that has to make sure that they are decontaminated, really, and whatever products you brought into the house. For example, if you've gone grocery shopping, you've got to make sure that you wipe those products down as well. So if you've made sure that the port of entry, as it were, is taken care of, then everything in your home will just continue to be as it always has been.
Absolutely. So set up compartments. I wipe my credit cards down, take them from my back pocket, wipe the credit cards down, throw those pants in a hot wash just in case. And then, think about the stuff you brought into the house. We haven't had to worry about that until now, but now the transmission's picking up. It's time to start thinking about who was, touching. And once again, we don't want to go crazy, but because we're not buying crazy amounts of food, at the moment, just get some alcohol on a rag and wipe down the packet of pasta. Get a good veggie wash. Traditionally in war times, and one of the easiest washes to use is a hot, warm water with just a drop, or it can be cold even, with a drop of Clorox, like just chlorine. Chlorine's an indiscriminate cleaner. It's not going to soak into the vegetables, so you'll eat chlorine. It is going to get, pesticides and people's hands and any bacteria off, and give it a scrub, and then rinse it in cold water, and the veggies should be clean. So you can do that in buckets outside your car even, so you've got your hot zone where the cars come in, and then your medium zone where you do wash down, and then inside the house stays sterile and clean, Yeah. So a lot of people, we don't think about what we're bringing in and out of the house. And so that's something I've become quite aware of. But you don't want to get completely paranoid about this stuff. Like I was at the vet yesterday and they gave me some tablets, which I washed down straight away in the packet and the silver, packaging. And then they gave me the paper, and I was a bit, he gave me the paper, and I tried to take, and then my husband took it from me, and I was a bit like, ooh, and I was like, but I can't wipe that down because I'll wipe all the information off. I was like, how about we just relax here, and just like get a grip for a moment, and not be too over the top.
Well, I mean,
So
I
this
think
is
if
where
we
we
all
need
take,
to.
as much precautions as we possibly can, we're not perfect. We are all imperfect people, but if we do the best job that we can and we make sure to try our hardest to sort of maintain social distance and maintain hygiene, we should be able to. And we're all locked down anyway, so I think we should be able to have a handle on this at some stage.
Yeah, yeah. I just think that the best thing we can do at the moment is social distancing and self isolation, no matter where you are in the world. It's so important at this time. It really is.
Yeah.
And if you can't be bothered doing it for you, think of someone you love that's compromised, or someone whose life could be have a better quality of life without ever having to contract this disease. And and that should motivate you, so I think sometimes when we think about it outside ourselves, we're more motivated to take these precautions. So it's not about you, it's about us. But also on that note, I think it's really important to say at the moment is that we don't isolate ourselves from our communities. There's a lot of people at home on their own, especially in yachting. There's a lot of people at home with kids, with their partners away, that are stuck inside, homeschooling without socialisation, and it's tough. There's a lot of people that are normally very social creatures living suddenly alone in apartments and don't get to go to the office every day that they absolutely love. There's people at home when they're two really, busy people that are living at home, together trying to work, think about the cans rather than the can'ts. But when people are normally active, like for people that exercise, not to run, like my dogs are going crazy. I think we're all, having to keep that routine and reach out to others, maybe more than you normally would. You don't have to go and hug them, but maybe get that person next door, or find out the old lady that doesn't seem to have visitors down the road number, or put a note out to your friends or your WhatsApp groups and say, I'm going, because you can't take kids into the shops now. So a friend of mine had to leave her 4-year-old outside, and she's got no, doesn't, couldn't leave it anywhere else, had to leave the kid outside and go shopping. And so why don't we reach out to people and say, I'm going down to the shop, can I get you some rice or some veggies? Do you need anything from the chemist? You don't have to drop it in and hug them. You can leave it on their doorstep. You can let them even wipe it down for you. But maybe reach out to that old person in your building that you've never said hi to, and put a note under their door and say, hi, I'm Manda, this is my number. If I can ever do anything and pick anything up for you, here it is. Or if you've got elderly friends and people in other countries, just getting on the phone at the moment. I think we really need to stick together as a community, and not, people can get isolated. We're social beings and we need each other. And so we can't let this little degree of social isolation tear us apart. We need to come together stronger. And, something amazing and beautiful my mum said was that she's like, I really believe, the corona is going to make the world a kinder place. And she said how everyone was swapping numbers in Australia and offering to do shopping and, really really making the world a better place. And I think if we can all open our hearts and come from that perspective and look after each other, even if you don't even know the new girl down the street with 2 kids, pop a note under the door, write it in 3 languages if you have to. But think about every day, rather than getting upset about what you can't do, think about what you can do. And when you're thinking about what you can do for yourself, think about what you can do for other people at this time, because there's probably someone just down the road a bit worse off than you, or struggling a bit more. And sometimes just a random phone call and a bit of a silly chat can make someone's day.
Well, you know what? I think you're right, Amanda, because we are in a situation now where we have been forced to self-isolate. But I think in doing so, we might possibly bring ourselves so much closer together in the end.
Yeah. And we're just so lucky we've got the social media, and the telephones and the free, with all the abilities to call for free overseas, and it not, you know, if this had happened 20 years ago when we all first started traveling, although some of us, or 30 years ago, you know, where it was like $80 reverse charge call to call your parents, and we couldn't do that, you know. I remember getting reverse charge calls at my grandma's from my aunt. She was like, nope, don't take it. You know, so we've got the ability to reach out, you know, and while we've got internet and that's all going well, which I'm sure will continue, just reach out to someone every day, and it's good for you too. You know, the more we do for others, the better we feel and the better quality of life. It's a really important thing as contribution in someone's mental health and feeling like a functioning human in society. And it's scientifically proven that when that breaks down and when people aren't contributing, you know, that they aren't as happy. So it's a really good way to, you know, to protect yourself at the moment, is be kind.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Manda, for coming on board and talking to us about, you know, all the issues that we are facing at the moment. And you have given us a lot to think about, and the hand washing and some very valuable tips. So we thank you for your time.
No worries, no worries. And just one other thing is just keep an eye on temperatures and make sure you know how to use a thermometer properly too. You know, so a lot of people don't realise that if you put the thermometer under the arm, you normally have to add 0.5 to the score when you get it. So when you know, the thermometers that go in the ear often have to go in pull the ear down and go in quite well into the tympanic membrane. So make sure that you understand the technology you're using, and just and keep an eye on it, you know. Yeah.
Excellent.
So thanks. Just wanted to put that in.
No, that is important. And actually, I had forgotten to ask you that. That was one of my questions that I meant to ask. But thank you for that. And of course, you can always go on to, you know, if you want to know all of the ways to use a thermometer in, you know, whichever way you need to. There's always all sorts of tutorials online as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in for another edition of Coffee and Conversation right here on Yachting International Radio. We'll see you next time.